Hey, so welcome back to my YouTube channel. So I'm here on Botanybay in Kent, and it's a really beautiful beach. I've never been to this beach before, and as you can see behind me, there's some really interesting rocks that I want to paint into my painting. So the weather's amazing, and yeah, it's a really lovely place to be. So make sure you subscribe to my channel, and let's get into this video. I'm painting on a gesso primed panel that I've toned to a neutral grey. I start sketching down the main lines of the composition using raw umber paint. I sketch in the big shape of the rock and the horizon line. Next I draw in the shadow shapes. Because the scene is being lit by direct sunlight, the shadows are going to be really sharp and really clear to see. And even though these shapes will move a bit as the sun moves, it's good to try and sketch in the general shape of these, as the shape of the shadow will correlate to the form of the object. I start by painting the lightest light of the painting down first. In this case, this is the area on the white rock which is getting hit directly by the sun. And for this mix, I'm using pretty much pure titanium white with just a very small touch of cadmium yellow to give it a slightly warm glow, as the sun being a warm light. The reason I'm starting this painting by painting the lightest light is because those lights on the rock are really captivating. They really capture your eye, it really shines. And because the white of the rock is so bright, I don't need to be afraid to go straight in with pure white, as I know nothing else in the composition is going to be as bright as this. Therefore I can use this tone as a key to reference how light other areas of the painting should be in relation to this. It also forces me to paint high key, so to paint the overall painting brighter. As if I were to paint the shadows first, and let's say I made them too dark, I would have to paint the other areas in relation to these, which would result in a darker painting overall, which is not what I want for this subject matter. One thing I love about painting white objects, especially outdoors in sunlight, is you can see a great deal of colour variation within the shadows, because I will pick up a lot of reflected light, such as the blue from the sky and the warm yellows from the sand. I find it's helpful, especially when painting outdoors in strong light, to think of everything as a light source, at least in the sense that every object is reflecting light into whatever's next to it. For example, in the shadow of the white rock, the parts of the rock that are facing outwards or upwards are receiving a lot more light from the blue sky. So these areas will be quite blue in hue, and the parts of the rock that are angled down will have a warmer tone due to the reflected light they're receiving from the sand. There will also be a general gradation in hue, with the highest parts of the rock being more blue due to this reflected light from the sky, and the lower parts of the rock being more sandy orange due to the proximity of the sand. Also, in general, I'm trying to keep the shadows quite thin and the lights quite thick. So I'm really using impasto paint in the lights and applying the brush strokes very broadly. Whereas in the shadows, I'm using quite a lot more of my medium to thin the paint down, and in areas where the paint has got quite thick, I'm just scraping it back with a palette knife. And the reason why I want to keep my shadows thin is because if I'm going to paint my shadows thickly with thick paint, the shadows will actually appear a lot lighter, as light will get picked up from the brush strokes and the shadows won't recede. Whereas in the light, you can make thick brush strokes because of the surface area of the paint. More light from the room or wherever you're exhibiting your painting is going to pick up and reflect on these thicker areas of the paint. So in general, in order to make the lights look really bright, you want to paint them quite thick, and to the shadows to kind of have that sort of dark, airy transparency to your shadows, you want to paint them quite thin. And if you look at a lot of classical paintings such as Rembrandt, he would go really thick in the lights and get a whole load of brush strokes and really nice impasto brushwork in the lights, but then in the shadows they were actually quite thin. And this is a general theme amongst classical paintings and even paintings in the 19th century, and it's just quite a good way to control how light and how dark areas will appear. through the application of the paint. Another point when painting the shadows of the rock is, even though I'm trying to pick out these subtle variations in colour between the light blue areas where the sky is being reflected and the yellowy sandy areas where the sand is being reflected into the rocks, I'm trying to keep all the values within the shadows very unified, so very close and very similar. So if I were to say, put this image into black and white, the shadows would look one single tone. As I paint the sea, I'm really trying to pay very close attention to the subtle shifts in hue and value within the sea, as this is what's going to give the sea that transparent, watery feeling. For example, where the sea meets the horizon, it's quite a lot darker and it has a greeny blue tone. And then as the sea gets closer and closer, there's some areas which are a fair bit lighter, a bit yellower, where you can see the seabed through the water. Then just after the waves, you have this very thin layer of water, which is a sort of purpley blue colour because it's reflecting the sky. And then I'm using pure titanium white to pick out the waves. And I also paint in the purpley blue shadow that's getting cast by the rocks. Here I'm painting some people into the scene. I find this gives a nice feeling to the painting, and it makes the painting a bit more interesting as there's a few more points of visual interest for the viewer to look at, and it also adds a narrative to the scene as well. Another nice thing about having people in a scene is that everybody knows the size of a person, and therefore it gives scale to the painting. For example, this rock or cliff that is so iconic of this beach in Kent, without the people there, it's slightly harder to tell the scale of how big this rock actually is. So therefore, by painting people in, it instantly gives this rock that impressive sense of scale. I hope you enjoyed that video. If you did, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. Also, you can follow me on Instagram at George Frederick Thomas. Take care, and I'll see you in the next video.